She was paid $15 to ruin a friend's prom. But the millionaire CEO fell in love. But as she took a step toward her destiny, something made her look up. Steel gray eyes met hers from across the room, and for a moment, the music faded. The man staring at her wasn't a teenager. He was older, maybe 35, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had seen more than its share of difficult decisions. Have you ever been so desperate that you considered betraying someone you cared about? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She clutched 15 crumpled dollars in her palm, the exact price someone had put on destroying her best friend's perfect night. $15. That's all it took to buy someone's loyalty. Have you ever been so desperate that you considered betraying someone you cared about? Tonight, you'll see what happens when poverty meets privilege, when desperation collides with dignity. Stay with me, because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about friendship and forgiveness. The Atlanta ballroom stretched before Danielle Carter like a scene from a movie she'd never been invited to watch. Crystal chandeliers hung from 20-foot ceilings, each one probably worth more than her mother made in 3 years cleaning office buildings. Designer gowns swept across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the kind of wealth she'd only seen on television. Her second-hand dress, a navy blue number from Goodwill that she'd spent 2 hours pressing, felt like a costume that didn't quite fit. The fabric scratched against her skin, reminding her with every movement that she didn't belong here. Around her, teenage girls laughed with the confidence that comes from never wondering if you'll eat dinner tonight. Their jewelry caught the light, throwing rainbows across walls painted in shades of gold and cream. Danielle's fingers tightened around the crumpled bills. The woman in black had been very specific. Wait until the prom king and queen are announced. Walk to the center of the floor. Read the letter out loud. Make sure everyone hears about what happened last summer at the lake house. She didn't know what the letter said. Didn't want to know. But $15 meant groceries for 3 days. It meant her mother's blood pressure medication. It meant keeping the lights on for another week while she looked for a second job. The music thundered from speakers hidden somewhere in the walls, a pop song she recognized from the radio at the diner where she worked weekends. But here, surrounded by champagne glasses and conversations about college acceptance letters to schools she'd never afford, even familiar music sounded foreign. Young men in tuxedos that probably cost more than her monthly rent glanced her way. Some looked curious, others dismissive. A few stared with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl, like she was something exotic they might want to try. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and wished she could disappear. The envelope felt heavy in her purse, heavier than $15 should feel. But desperation has its own weight, and tonight it was crushing her chest with every breath. Across the room, she spotted her target. Sarah. No, it was Savannah now. She'd changed her name when she moved to Georgia, traded her Alabama accent for something that sounded more refined. Savannah stood near the stage in a white dress that probably cost more than Danielle's car, if her car had been running. Her smile was perfect, her posture straight, her life exactly what Danielle's could have been if things had gone differently. If her father hadn't left, if her mother hadn't gotten sick, if desperation hadn't become her closest companion somewhere around age 14. The clock on the wall showed 9:47. 13 minutes until the announcement. 13 minutes until she destroyed the friendship that had once been the only good thing in her life. But as she took a step toward her destiny, something made her look up. Steel gray eyes met hers from across the room, and for a moment, the music faded. The man staring at her wasn't a teenager. He was older, maybe 35, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had seen more than its share of difficult decisions. He was watching her with an intensity that made her heart race and her palms sweat. Not the way the boys looked at her, like she was a curiosity. He looked at her like he could see straight through her skin to the guilt eating her alive. As the mysterious woman in black handed her the envelope with specific instructions, Danielle had no idea that across the room, steel gray eyes were already watching her every move, eyes that belonged to the one man who could destroy her or save her. The richest man in Georgia wasn't watching his daughter dance. He was studying the woman who clearly didn't belong, wondering what brought her to his world. Richard Lawson had built his fortune by reading people, and the young woman by the far wall was sending signals that made every instinct he'd developed scream danger. Not danger to him, danger to her. She moved like someone carrying weight that had nothing to do with her small frame. Her dress was clean but old, pressed but not tailored. Her shoes were polished but worn at the heels. More telling than what she wore was how she wore it. She kept touching her purse like it contained something that burned. Her eyes darted to the exits every few minutes, calculating distance. Her shoulders stayed rigid, ready for flight. He'd grown up in East Texas, the son of a man who worked oil rigs 16 hours a day and still couldn't keep the lights on. Richard knew desperation when he saw it, and this girl was drowning in it. From his position near the bar, he had a clear view of the entire ballroom. His daughter, Emma, sparkled in her white dress, surrounded by friends whose biggest worry was which college would accept them. At 17, she lived in a world where problems could be solved with phone calls and credit cards. She'd never known hunger or fear or the particular shame that comes from needing something you can't afford. Richard had made sure of that. Everything he'd built, the tech company that now employed 3,000 people, the real estate investments, the careful cultivation of wealth and influence, all of it existed to ensure his daughter never felt the claws of poverty digging into her dreams. But the young woman across the room knew those claws intimately. He could see it in the way she held herself, protective and ready, in the way her eyes cataloged every exit, every potential threat, every person who might judge her for not belonging. His business partner, Marcus Webb, appeared at his elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Hell of a party, Richard. Emma looks beautiful tonight." Richard accepted the drink, but didn't take his eyes off the mystery woman. "She does. You see something interesting over there? Someone who doesn't belong." Marcus followed his gaze and frowned. "Should I have security?" "No." Richard's voice carried the authority that had built empires and ended careers. "She's not a threat. She's in trouble." The woman, girl, really, she couldn't be more than 22, checked her watch. Her face went pale, and she touched her purse again. Whatever she was carrying, whatever had brought her here, it was about to happen. Richard had survived in business by trusting his instincts, and right now, every instinct told him this girl was about to make a mistake that would change her life forever. The kind of mistake desperate people make when they can't see any other choice. He made those mistakes once. Before the money, before the success, before he learned that sometimes the thing that looks like salvation is actually destruction wearing a prettier dress. The music swelled as the DJ prepared to announce Prom King and Queen. Emma stood with her court, radiant and innocent, surrounded by friends who loved her. She had no idea that somewhere in this room, someone had paid $15 to destroy her perfect night. But Richard was beginning to suspect, and when he put the pieces together, the timing, the girl's obvious distress, the way she kept looking at Emma with something that looked like guilt, he moved. He built his empire by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Tonight would be no different. Have you ever felt someone watching you from across a room? That electric moment when eyes meet and everything changes? Tell me about it in the comments. When Danielle finally worked up the courage to execute her plan, she looked up to find Richard Lawson standing directly in her path, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I think we need to talk. Some conversations change your life. This one was about to save it." Richard's hand closed gently around Danielle's elbow, steering her away from the dance floor before she could protest. His touch was firm, but not forceful, the kind of guidance that suggested rather than demanded. Still, there was no mistaking the steel beneath the silk of his voice. "Please," he said, leading her toward a private alcove overlooking the Atlanta skyline. 5 minutes. The alcove felt like a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights, turning Atlanta into a constellation of gold and white stars. The music from the ballroom faded to a distant throb, replaced by the intimate quiet of expensive privacy. Crystal sconces cast warm light over leather furniture that probably cost more than Danielle's rent for a year. Richard closed the glass doors behind them, muffling the party noise completely. When he turned to face her, his steel-gray eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "You're about to make a mistake," he said simply. Danielle's grip tightened on her purse. "I don't know what you're talking about. The envelope in your purse. The way you keep checking your watch. The fact that you look like you're about to be sick." His voice was calm, matter of fact. "Someone paid you to be here tonight, didn't they?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "You don't know anything about me. I know desperation." The words landed soft but heavy. "I know what it feels like when you're drowning and someone throws you a rope that turns out to be a noose." Something in his tone made her look up, really look at him. Beneath the expensive tuxedo and the confidence that came from never wondering where your next meal would come from, she saw something familiar. Something that recognized her pain because it had lived there too. "How much?" he asked gently. The question broke something inside her chest. $15. The words came out as a whisper, heavy with shame. Richard's jaw tightened. $15 to do what? Danielle's hand shook as she pulled the envelope from her purse. "Read this. Out loud. During the prom king and queen announcement. Make sure everyone hears." He took the envelope, his fingers brushing hers for a moment longer than necessary. The contact sent electricity up her arm, warm and unwelcome. She didn't need to be attracted to a man whose daughter she'd been paid to humiliate. Richard opened the envelope and read silently. His face went from calm to furious in the span of 3 seconds. When he looked up, his eyes were cold as winter steel. "Do you know what this says?" "No." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm night. "I didn't want to know. It's a lie. A complete fabrication designed to destroy my daughter's reputation and hurt her college prospects." His voice was deadly quiet. "Who paid you?" "A woman. She didn't give me her name. Just said Emma, your daughter, needed to be taken down a peg. That rich girls like her needed to learn consequences." "What did this woman look like?" Danielle described the elegant woman in black who'd approached her in the parking lot, offering cash for a simple task. As she spoke, Richard's expression grew darker. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "You know her? My business partner's wife. Victoria Webb." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "She's been jealous of Emma since the day my daughter got accepted to Stanford early admission. Victoria's son got rejected." Danielle felt sick. "I'm so sorry. I never would have. If I'd known it was about college or... Why did you need the money?" The question was gentle, but stripped her bare anyway. "My mother. She needs medication. Blood pressure pills. They're expensive, and we don't have insurance, and I work 2 jobs, but it's never enough. And..." "Stop." Richard's voice was soft now, understanding. "You don't have to explain poverty to me." Something in his tone made her believe him. "You've been poor. East Texas trailer park until I was 25. Ramen noodles for dinner and ketchup soup when the ramen ran out." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, expensive cologne over something essentially masculine. No woman should have to choose between her dignity and her family's survival. What would you do if someone offered you money to hurt a friend? Have you ever been so desperate that you considered crossing your own moral lines? "What happens now?" she whispered. Richard's smile was sharp as a blade. "Now we turn the tables. Victoria wants to play games with my daughter? She just made the biggest mistake of her life." When Richard asked who paid her, Danielle's answer made his jaw clench with rage. "You need to stay close to me tonight," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Someone wants to hurt my daughter, and you're the key to finding out who." She came to destroy his world. Instead, she became his secret weapon. "Here's what's going to happen," Richard said, his voice carrying the authority that had built a tech empire from nothing. "You're going to stay by my side tonight. We're going to find Victoria Webb, and we're going to make sure she never tries to hurt another teenager again." Danielle's pulse quickened, not just from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from something else entirely. Standing this close to Richard Lawson, she could see the controlled power in the way he moved, the intelligence behind those steel-gray eyes, the barely contained fury that promised justice for anyone who tried to hurt his daughter. What if she recognizes me? What if she tells people I was supposed to? She won't get the chance. His hand settled on the small of her back, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Trust me, The word hung between them like a challenge. Trust. Well, had she ever been able to trust anyone with money and power? But something in Richard's eyes, some echo of the poverty he'd admitted to surviving, made her want to try. Okay, she whispered. What do we do? Richard's smile was predatory. We hunt. They moved through the ballroom like wolves in designer clothing. Richard knew exactly how to work a room. Stopping to shake hands with men in expensive suits, kissing the cheeks of women dripping in jewelry, accepting congratulations on Emma's beauty and poise. But his eyes never stopped moving, searching for their target. Danielle stayed close, trying to look like she belonged at his side. It should have been impossible. Her $15 dress next to his $1,000 tuxedo, her discount store shoes on marble floors that reflected wealth like mirrors. But something about Richard's presence made her feel protected, valued. When he introduced her as my friend Danielle, the words carried weight that made people nod respectfully instead of looking down their noses. There, Richard murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. By the champagne fountain. Victoria Webb stood in a circle of admirers, her black dress elegant and expensive, her smile sharp as a knife. She was beautiful in the way that money could make anyone beautiful. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, jewelry that caught the light like captured stars. But there was something cold in her eyes, something calculating that made Danielle's skin crawl. She's watching Emma, Danielle observed. Look at her face when your daughter laughs. Richard followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. Jealous bitch. It's more than jealousy, Danielle said, her street instincts kicking in. She hates her. Really, truly hates her. This isn't just about college acceptance. What do you mean? Danielle studied Victoria's expression, recognizing something familiar in the older woman's face. She hates what Emma represents. The confidence, the happiness, the security. She hates that your daughter has never known want or fear or desperation. She paused. I used to hate girls like Emma too. Richard looked at her sharply. Used to, until tonight. Until I realized that hating someone for having what you want is just another kind of prison. She met his eyes. Your daughter didn't choose to be born wealthy any more than I chose to be born poor. Something shifted in Richard's expression, a softness that transformed his entire face. You're remarkable, you know that? Heat flooded her cheeks. Before she could respond, Victoria Webb's voice cut through the music and conversation like a blade. Richard, there you are, darling. Emma looks absolutely radiant tonight. They turned as Victoria approached, her smile bright and false as a painted mask. Her eyes swept over Danielle dismissively before fixing on Richard with predatory focus. Victoria. Richard's voice was perfectly polite, perfectly cold. I'd like you to meet Danielle Carter. Danielle, this is Victoria Webb, Marcus's wife. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. Charming to meet you, dear. How do you know Richard? Have you ever found yourself trusting someone you just met? Sometimes strangers see us clearer than people who've known us for years. Share your experience below. The lie came easily to Danielle's lips, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. We met through business. I'm consulting on his new community outreach program. Victoria's smile grew sharper. How philanthropic. As they closed in on their target, Richard's daughter appeared, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, she whispered, someone just told me something terrible about you and her. The trap was closing, but not the way anyone expected. The truth has a way of surfacing at the worst possible moment, like a prom queen's tears in front of 300 witnesses. Emma Lawson stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her white dress pristine as fresh snow, her face crumpled with confusion and hurt. Around her, conversations died as people turned to stare at the billionaire's daughter crying at her own prom. Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? Richard moved toward his daughter, but she stepped back, her eyes darting between him and Danielle with something that looked like betrayal. Is it true? Emma's voice carried across the silent ballroom. Did you really pay her to be here tonight? To pretend to be your girlfriend, so people would think you're dating someone my age? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Around them, phones came out, cameras aimed at the drama unfolding in real time. Social media would explode within minutes. Richard's reputation, his daughter's innocence. Everything could be destroyed by one perfectly crafted lie. Victoria Webb stood at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of concerned sympathy that didn't quite hide the satisfaction in her eyes. She played this perfectly, turning Danielle's presence into ammunition against Richard himself. "Emma, no." Richard's voice was steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "That's not what happened." "Then why is she here?" Emma's tears fell freely now. "Why is she wearing that dress to my prom?" Everyone's saying, her voice broke. "They're saying awful things about you. About her. About us." Danielle felt the weight of 300 stares, the heat of judgment and disgust and fascination all focused on her like spotlights. The marble floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. This was worse than simply reading a letter. This was character assassination in real time, broadcast live to everyone who mattered in Atlanta social circles. She could run, should run, disappear into the night, and let Richard handle the mess without her. But something in Emma's eyes, the genuine pain, the confusion of a girl whose perfect world was crumbling, made her step forward instead. "You want the truth?" Danielle's voice cut through the whispers and camera clicks. "Here's the truth." Richard reached for her arm, but she moved beyond his reach, into the center of the circle that had formed around them. If she was going down, she'd do it on her own terms. "My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 22 years old, and I work 2 jobs just to keep my mother alive." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Earlier tonight, a woman paid me $15 to humiliate Emma in front of all of you, to read a letter full of lies that would destroy her reputation and hurt her college prospects." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones tilted closer, capturing every word. "I took the money because I was desperate, because my mother needs medication we can't afford, because I haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days, because desperation makes you do things you never thought you could do." She looked directly at Emma. "But your father stopped me. He saw what I was about to do, and he prevented it. Not because he knew you, but because he recognized someone drowning and threw me a lifeline instead of letting me sink." The ballroom was dead silent now, everyone hanging on her words. "So no, Emma, your father didn't pay me to be here. He didn't pay me to pretend anything. He saved your night and probably saved my soul." Her voice softened. "He's a good man. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Would you take the blame to protect someone else's family? Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand in the fire for people who matter. Tell me about a time you protected someone else." Victoria Webb's face had gone pale, her careful plan crumbling as Danielle's honesty cut through her web of lies. But before she could respond, before security could move, before the crowd could erupt into chaos, Emma Lawson did something that surprised everyone. She walked across the dance floor and took Danielle's hand. As security moved to escort Danielle out, Richard's voice cut through the chaos. "She stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave my party." But the real shock came when his daughter stepped forward, extending her hand to Danielle with words that changed everything. "Sometimes your fiercest defender comes from the last person you expect." "Thank you," Emma said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Thank you for protecting me when you didn't even know me." The words hit Danielle like a physical force. This 17-year-old girl, raised in luxury and privilege, was thanking her, not judging her, not looking down on her for being desperate enough to take money from a stranger. Thanking her. Emma's grip on her hand was firm, real, grounding her to this moment when everything could have gone so wrong. Around them, the crowd stirred restlessly, phones still recording, whispers still spreading like wildfire through the room. "But someone did pay you," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "And that someone needs to answer for trying to destroy my night and use your desperation to do it." All eyes turned to Victoria Webb, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd like a deer caught in headlights. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the panic creeping in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she realized her careful plan was crashing down around her. "I don't know what this girl is talking about," Victoria said, forcing a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She's obviously confused, or lying, or... Are you calling me a liar? Danielle's voice cut through Victoria's denials like a blade. The girl who'd grown up scrapping for everything she had wasn't about to let a rich woman in designer clothes dismiss her pain. She's lying. Victoria's voice rose, desperate now. Richard, surely you can see this is some kind of setup. This girl probably targeted your daughter, used your charity to get close. Enough. Richard's voice carried the kind of authority that made boardrooms fall silent and stock prices jump. Victoria, I think it's time you told everyone why you really wanted Emma humiliated tonight. Victoria's face went white. I have no idea what you're... Your son got rejected from Stanford. Richard continued, his voice deadly calm. Emma got accepted early admission. You've been poisoning the well against her for months, telling anyone who'd listen that she only got in because of my donations. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was better than reality TV, better than any drama they'd ever seen. Rich people destroying each other in public was the kind of entertainment that will be talked about for months. That's not, Victoria started, but Richard kept going. You've been stealing money from our company for 2 years, Victoria. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. You thought I wouldn't notice because you're Marcus's wife, because we're friends. His smile was cold as winter steel. But I notice everything. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in shock and excitement. Phones captured every moment, and Victoria Webb's carefully constructed world began to crumble in real time. You have no proof, she said, but her voice shook. I have bank records, wire transfers, digital trails that lead straight back to accounts in your name. Richard's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. What I didn't have was motive. Until tonight, Emma stepped closer to Danielle, showing solidarity that meant more than any amount of money could. You try to destroy my reputation because you're jealous, because your son isn't good enough for the schools I got into. And when your jealousy wasn't enough, Danielle added, finding her voice and her strength, you decided to hurt Richard through his daughter. You found someone desperate enough to do your dirty work, someone you thought you could throw away when you were done. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. You think you're so perfect, don't you? All of you. Your precious little princess gets everything handed to her on a silver platter, while my son. Your son is a mediocre student with a trust fund, Emma interrupted, her voice sharp as her father's. Earned my acceptance with 4 years of straight A's and volunteer work. Don't blame me because he spent high school partying instead of studying. The crowd loved it. This was the kind of drama that would dominate social media for weeks. But as Danielle watched Victoria's face twist with rage and humiliation, she felt something unexpected. Pity. She understood desperation, understood the feeling of watching others succeed while you failed. The difference was that Victoria's desperation came from entitlement, while hers came from survival. Have you ever been surprised by someone stepping up to defend you? Sometimes the people we least expect become our strongest allies. Share your story. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the authorities about Richard's accusations, and Victoria's face went from angry to terrified in seconds. As police sirens wailed outside and handcuffs clicked around wrists, Richard turned to Danielle with an intensity that made her heart race. This night isn't over. We need to talk alone. When the chaos ended and the cameras stopped flashing, 2 strangers stood alone in an empty ballroom, finally free to be honest. The last of the police cars had pulled away 20 minutes ago, taking Victoria Webb with them in handcuffs. The ballroom stood empty now except for scattered rose petals, abandoned champagne glasses, and the echoes of the most dramatic prom in Atlanta history. Danielle sat on the edge of the stage, her second-hand shoes kicked off, her feet finally free from the pinch of discount store heels. The marble floor was cool against her bare soles, grounding her after a night that felt more like a dream or a nightmare than real life. Richard had sent Emma home with friends after making sure she was okay, after assuring her that none of this was her fault, after promising that Victoria Webb would never be able to hurt her again. Now he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his bow tie undone, his tuxedo jacket draped over a chair, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "Are you okay?" he asked without turning around. "I don't know," Danielle answered honestly. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped me. If I'd read that letter, destroyed Emma's night, ruined her reputation." She shuddered. "I would have carried that guilt forever. But you didn't read it, because you stopped me, not because I was strong enough to do the right thing on my own." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I was ready to hurt an innocent girl for $15. What does that make me?" Richard finally turned around, and the expression on his face was gentle, understanding in a way that made her chest tight. "It makes you human. It makes you someone who was pushed to the breaking point and did what you thought you had to do to survive. How can you look at me like that? Like I'm not completely pathetic?" He walked over and sat beside her on the stage, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent building an empire from nothing. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" His voice was soft, intimate in the empty ballroom. "I see a woman who works 2 jobs to keep her mother alive, who took a terrible deal because she was out of options, then felt sick about it before she even went through with it, who confessed everything to protect people she'd just met, even though it would have been easier to run away." His fingers brushed against hers on the marble floor, a touch so gentle it sent electricity racing up her arm. "I see strength, Danielle. Real strength. The kind that comes from surviving things that would break other people." She looked at him through eyes bright with tears. "You grew up poor too, didn't you? Really poor, not just we couldn't afford private school poor. East Texas trailer park. My father worked oil rigs when he could get the work, drank when he couldn't. My mother cleaned houses for people who wouldn't look her in the eye." Richard's voice was matter of fact, but she heard the old pain underneath. "I wore the same 3 shirts to high school for 2 years. Ate free lunch and pretended I wasn't hungry at dinner." "How did you get out?" "Scholarships, student loans, working 3 jobs through college and sleeping 4 hours a night for 6 years." He smiled, but it was edged with old bitterness. "I clawed my way out inch by bloody inch, and I swore I'd never go back. What would you do if someone saw your pain and chose to help instead of judge? Have you ever had someone look past your mistakes to see your heart? Is that why you helped me tonight? Because you remembered what it felt like? I helped you because it was the right thing to do. But yes, I remembered. I remembered what desperation tastes like, what it feels like to have your back against the wall with no good choices." His hand covered hers completely, warm and steady and real. "The difference is, I had family money as a safety net eventually. My grandmother left me enough to start my first company. You don't have that." "No," she whispered. "I don't have anything." "That's not true." His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending shivers up her spine. "You have integrity. You have courage. You have a heart that cares more about others than yourself, even when you're drowning." The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with something electric and dangerous. In the dim light of the empty ballroom, Richard Lawson wasn't a billionaire CEO. He was just a man who understood her pain, who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "Danielle," he said, his voice rougher now. "Yeah, I want to help you. Not charity, not pity. I want to offer you a job, a real job with my company. Something that uses your mind, your instincts, your ability to read people." He paused. "But I need you to know that's not the only reason I want you to stay." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What's the other reason?" "Because I haven't been able to stop looking at you since you walked into this room. Because watching you stand up for Emma, watching you tell the truth when it would have been easier to lie." His free hand touched her cheek, gentle as a whisper. "Because I think I'm falling for you, and that scares the hell out of me." When Richard offered her a job, not charity, but a real position in his company, Danielle's answer surprised them both. "I need to think about it," she whispered, already knowing that accepting would mean entering a world that could either lift her up or completely destroy her. She walked into the glass tower in downtown Atlanta, carrying nothing but determination and a secret. She was falling for her boss before her first day even began. 3 days later, Danielle, stood in front of the gleaming headquarters of Lawson Technologies. Her reflection multiplied in the mirrored glass of the 40-story building that reached toward the Georgia sky like a steel and chrome monument to success. Her mother had cried when Danielle told her about the job offer. Real tears of relief and hope, the kind her mother hadn't shed since Danielle's father walked out 12 years ago. The salary Richard offered was more than Danielle had ever imagined making, enough to cover her mother's medication, their rent, groceries, and still have money left over for things like new clothes and maybe, eventually, college classes. The lobby was all marble and modern art, with a security desk staffed by guards in suits nicer than anything Danielle had ever owned. Her new outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching skirt that she'd bought at Target with her advance paycheck, felt like a costume, but it was her costume now. "You must be Danielle Carter," the receptionist said with a smile that seemed genuine. "Mr. Lawson is expecting you." 38th floor. The elevator ride felt like flying, the city shrinking below her as she rose toward a future she'd never dared to dream about. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of glass offices and expensive furniture, where people in designer suits moved with the confidence of those who'd never wondered where their next meal was coming from. "Welcome to the team," a woman's voice said behind her. Danielle turned to find a perfectly groomed woman in her 40s extending a manicured hand. "I'm Jennifer Martinez, VP of Human Resources. Richard asked me to show you around." The tour was a blur of conference rooms and break areas, introduced to faces she tried to remember, explanations of company culture and benefits that seemed too good to be true. But through it all, her eyes kept searching for one person. Richard. She hadn't seen him since the night of the prom, hadn't spoken to him except for brief phone calls about paperwork and start dates. Part of her wondered if the intensity she'd felt between them had been real or just the adrenaline of a crisis situation. "Your office," Jennifer said, stopping in front of a glass-walled room with views of downtown Atlanta. Office. Danielle had never had an office before, had never had anything more than a locker at the diner and a shared break room that smelled like grease and broken dreams. This space was clean and bright, with a desk that could seat 6 people and technology that probably cost more than her car. "Richard will be by shortly to discuss your role in more detail," Jennifer said. "Welcome aboard, Danielle. I think you're going to do great things here." Alone in her new office, Danielle sank into the leather chair behind her desk and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened to her life in 72 hours. 3 days ago, she'd been ready to betray a friend for $15. Now she was sitting in an executive office, drawing a salary that would change everything for her and her mother. "How are you settling in?" Richard's voice made her heart jump. She looked up to find him standing in her doorway, and the sight of him hit her like a physical force. He'd traded his tuxedo for a perfectly tailored business suit, but he was still devastatingly handsome, still carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire from scratch. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "Good overwhelming, but still." He stepped into her office and closed the door behind him, the simple action creating an intimacy that made her pulse quicken. "I want to talk to you about your role here, about what I'm hoping you can bring to the team. Have you ever started over in a completely new world? When everything you knew changed overnight? Tell me how you found your footing." "I'm listening." "You have instincts, Danielle. Street smarts. You can read people in ways that can't be taught in business school." He moved closer to her desk, his eyes intense. "I want you working on special projects. Due diligence on potential partners, background research, anything that requires someone who can see past the surface. You want me to spy on people. I want you to protect this company the way you try to protect Emma that night. With honesty, with integrity, with the kind of courage that's rare in this business." The job sounded exciting, challenging, nothing like the mindless work she'd done before. But as Richard leaned against her desk, close enough that she could catch his scent, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, work was the last thing on her mind. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, his voice dropping lower. "What?" "The fact that every time I look at you, I remember what it felt like to almost kiss you in that empty ballroom." His honesty was brutal, beautiful. The fact that hiring you might have been the smartest business decision I've ever made, or the most dangerous mistake. Before she could respond, her computer chimed with an urgent email notification. As she opened it, her blood ran cold. 3 weeks in her new life, Danielle discovered a file she wasn't supposed to see. Financial records showing someone was still stealing from Richard's company. The betrayal wasn't over. It had just gotten more dangerous. She thought she was learning the business. Instead, she was uncovering a conspiracy that went straight to the top. The numbers didn't add up. Danielle had been at Lawson Technologies for 3 weeks, and her new job involved reviewing financial reports, analyzing spending patterns, looking for discrepancies that might indicate problems. It was detail work that suited her careful nature, work that felt important and challenging. But this particular file, buried deep in quarterly reports, showed patterns that made her skin crawl. Money was still disappearing. Not the obvious theft that Victoria Webb had been guilty of, but something more sophisticated, more dangerous. Wire transfers disguised as legitimate business expenses. Consulting fees paid to companies that didn't seem to exist. Equipment purchases that never showed up in inventory. Someone was stealing millions, not thousands. And they were good at it. Danielle's hands shook as she printed out the evidence, her mind racing through the implications. Victoria was in jail, but the theft was continuing, which meant someone else was involved, someone still inside the company, someone with access to high-level financial systems. The office was quiet at nearly 10 p.m., most employees long gone home to their families and normal lives. But Danielle had stayed late, trying to untangle the financial puzzle, trying to prove that she deserved the chance Richard had given her. Now she wished she'd gone home hours ago. Working late. The voice from the doorway made her jump, her heart hammering as she spun around. Marcus Webb stood in her office entrance, Richard's business partner, Victoria's husband. The man whose wife was now facing embezzlement charges because of what had happened at the prom. Just catching up on some reports, Danielle said, trying to keep her voice steady. She casually moved her hand over the printed financial documents, but Marcus's eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Find anything interesting? He stepped into her office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. Danielle's instincts, the same street smarts that had kept her alive in rough neighborhoods, screamed danger. Marcus Webb was tall, well-dressed, and perfectly polite, but there was something in his eyes that reminded her of hungry predators. Just numbers, she said. Pretty boring stuff. I don't think you're finding it boring at all. Marcus moved closer to her desk, his smile friendly and completely terrifying. I think you're finding it very interesting, very concerning. Would you risk everything to protect someone you're falling for? When loyalty conflicts with safety, what you choose? Share your thoughts below. I don't know what you mean. Victoria wasn't working alone, Danielle. She was never smart enough to pull off what we accomplished together. His voice was conversational, like he was discussing the weather instead of confessing to felonies. She was just the face of the operation, the one willing to take risks while I stayed safely in the background. Horror crept up Danielle's spine like ice water. You set up your own wife. I protected myself. Victoria got greedy, sloppy. She started taking bigger risks, making it personal with Richard's daughter. That wasn't part of the plan. Marcus sat down across from her desk, making himself comfortable. When she got arrested, I thought the heat would die down. Thought everyone would assume the problem was solved. But you kept stealing. I kept taking what I'd earned. 20 years I've been Richard's partner, watching him get all the credit, all the recognition, while I did the real work behind the scenes. His friendly mask slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. Did you know he started this company with my money? My family's money. But somehow, when we went public, his name ended up on all the papers. Danielle's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this conversation, out of this office, out of this building. But Marcus was between her and the door, and something about his posture told her he wasn't planning to let her leave. What do you want? She asked. I want you to forget what you found. Delete those files, shred those papers, and pretend tonight never happened. His smile was sharp as broken glass. In return, I'll make sure you keep your nice new job, your nice new salary, your nice new life. And if I don't, well, That would be unfortunate. Accidents happen, Danielle. Young women disappear all the time in a city like Atlanta. Poor girls from bad neighborhoods. Girls nobody really misses. He leaned forward. Your mother needs her medication, doesn't she? We'll be ashamed if something happened to you. And she couldn't afford her pills anymore. Terror flooded her veins, but so did rage. This bastard was threatening her mother, the one person in the world who mattered more than anything else. You son of a bitch, she whispered. Careful, Danielle. You're in no position to make threats. Marcus stood up, straightening his expensive suit. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. Make the right choice. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Danielle, don't bother running to Richard. He won't believe you without proof, and by tomorrow, all your proof will have mysteriously disappeared from the company's servers. When Danielle finally told Richard what she'd found, his face went pale. He's not just stealing money, Richard whispered. He's planning to destroy everything I've built. And now that you know, he didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood she was now in danger too. Love makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you dangerous when someone threatens the person you're falling for. Richard's penthouse apartment felt like a fortress 30 floors above the Atlanta skyline, but Danielle knew that height and money couldn't protect them from the kind of danger they were facing. She sat on his leather couch, wrapped in one of his shirts because her hands wouldn't stop shaking, watching him pace like a caged predator. 20 years, Richard said, his voice tight with betrayal and rage. 20 years I trusted him. Let him into my home, my business, my family's life. It was past midnight. After Marcus's threat, Danielle had called Richard immediately, and he'd sent a car for her within minutes. Now, they were holed up in his apartment, trying to figure out how to survive what was coming next. He said he'd make the evidence disappear from the company's servers, Danielle said. That you wouldn't believe me without proof. He's wrong about that. Richard stopped pacing and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I believe you. About the money, about the threats, about everything. Why? Because you've never lied to me. Not once. Not even when the truth could have hurt you. He sat down beside her on the couch, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. And because Marcus has been asking questions about you for weeks. About your background, your family, your living situation. I thought he was just being protective of the company, but now you realize he was looking for ways to hurt me. To hurt us both. Richard's jaw clenched. He knows I care about you, Danielle. He can see what's happening between us, and he's planning to use it against me. What's happening between us? The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. They hadn't talked about the attraction that crackled every time they were in the same room, hadn't acknowledged the way her heart raced when he looked at her like she was precious, important, worth protecting. What is happening between us? She asked softly. Richard's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that contrasted with the fury in his eyes. I'm falling in love with you. Have been since that night at the prom when you chose honesty over safety. The confession hit her like lightning, electric and transformative. Richard, I know it's complicated. I know I'm your boss, that I'm 15 years older than you, that we come from completely different worlds. His thumb traced across her knuckles. But I've never felt anything like this before. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. Richard's face went dark as he read it. What is it? Marcus. He says he has pictures of us together. Compromising pictures that he'll release to the media if we don't back down. Richard's voice was deadly calm. He's going to destroy both our reputations. Claim I've been taking advantage of a vulnerable employee. Rage flooded Danielle's system, hot and fierce. That bastard. He's not going to stop, Danielle. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about power, about control, about destroying me in the most personal way possible. Have you ever had someone you'd risk everything to protect? When does attraction become something deeper? Tell me about that moment when you knew. Then we don't give him the chance. Danielle stood up, her fear transforming into determination. We go after him first. It's too dangerous. He's already threatened your mother. And if he's desperate enough, I'm not running. Her voice was steel. I'm not letting him destroy your life because I was brave enough to find the truth. And I'm sure as hell not letting him hurt my mother. Richard looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Admiration, maybe, or recognition of a strength he hadn't fully realized she possessed. "What are you suggesting?" "We turn the tables. We make him think he's won, that I'm backing down, that you don't believe me." She began pacing now, her mind working through possibilities. "But while he's celebrating, we gather real evidence. Stuff he can't delete or destroy." "Ow!" Danielle smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. "You forget, Richard. I grew up poor. I know how to be invisible, how to get into places I'm not supposed to be, how to find things people want to keep hidden." Richard's phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and they both stared at it like it was a poisonous snake. "Answer it," Danielle said, "but put on speaker. Let him think he's won." As Richard answered the call, Marcus's voice filled the apartment, smooth and threatening. "Richard, I hope you've had time to talk sense into your little girlfriend." "She's not my girlfriend," Richard lied smoothly. "And yes, we've talked. Danielle has agreed to forget what she thinks she saw." "Smart girl. I knew she'd see reason." But as they played their part in Marcus's game, neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, or the telephoto lens aimed at Richard's apartment windows. The threatening phone call came at 3 a.m. "Tell your little investigator to back off, or she'll end up like her mother." The line went dead, and Richard realized with cold certainty, they just made this personal. Some secrets are buried so deep that when they surface, they don't just change the present, they rewrite the past. The words echoed in the silence of Richard's apartment like a death sentence. "End up like her mother." Danielle's face had gone white as paper, her hands trembling as the full meaning of Marcus's threat sank in. "What did he mean?" Richard asked gently, though something cold and terrible was already forming in his mind. "My mother died in a car accident when I was 16, Danielle whispered. "That's what I always thought. That's what the police told me." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. Too many coincidences, too many connections that she'd never wanted to examine too closely. Richard was already moving, pulling out his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with the urgency of a man who'd built an empire on information. "What was your mother's name?" "Her full name, Maria Elena Carter. She died on Highway 285, just outside Atlanta. Single car accident. They said she fell asleep at the wheel." The search results filled the screen within seconds, and what Richard found made his blood run cold. "Danielle, your mother didn't just work as a house cleaner. She worked for cleaning services that contracted with major corporations. So, including a company called Southern Facility Management, a company that had contracts with Lawson Technologies 15 years ago." Richard's voice was tight with controlled fury. "A company that Marcus recommended we hire." The pieces began falling into place like dominoes, each revelation more horrifying than the last. Richard pulled up more files, more records, painting a picture that made Danielle sink into the couch like the weight of truth was crushing her chest. "Your mother would have had access to offices after hours," Richard continued. "She would have seen financial documents, overheard conversations, maybe noticed discrepancies in company accounts." "You think she found out Marcus was stealing money, even back then?" "I think she found out something that made her dangerous to him. And I think he killed her for it." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming everything Danielle thought she knew about her life. Her mother's death hadn't been an accident. It had been murder, designed to look like exhaustion and bad luck. "He didn't just steal your money," Danielle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He stole my entire life. My mother would still be alive if she hadn't tried to do the right thing." Richard moved to sit beside her, pulling her against his chest as tears she'd held back for 15 years finally broke free. She'd always wondered why her mother had been driving so late that night, why she'd been on a highway that wasn't part of her usual route. Now she knew. "I'm so sorry," Richard murmured into her hair. "I'm so damn sorry." But grief was transforming into something harder, more dangerous. Danielle pulled back from his embrace, and Richard saw something in her eyes that made him proud and terrified at the same time. "He's going to pay for this," she said. "For my mother, for your company, for everything he's destroyed. Danielle, we need to be smart about this. If he killed your mother, then he's capable of killing me too. I know. She stood up, pacing to the windows that looked out over the city her mother had died, trying to protect. But I'm not 16 anymore, and I'm not alone. What would you do if you discovered your life struggles weren't just bad luck, but someone's deliberate cruelty? How do you process that kind of betrayal? Richard's phone buzzed with another message, and this time when he read it, his face went deadly calm. What is it? Marcus wants to meet. Tomorrow night, just the two of us. Says if I come alone, he'll explain everything and we can work out a deal. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. Richard's smile was cold as winter steel. But it's also an opportunity. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to give Marcus Webb exactly what he wants. We're going to make him think he's won. Richard pulled her back into his arms, and she could feel the controlled fury in every line of his body. And then we're going to destroy him the way he destroyed your mother. As the pieces fell into place, Danielle looked up at Richard with tears in her eyes. He didn't just steal your money. He stole my entire life. And in that moment, Richard made a vow that would change both their destinies forever. There's a moment in every relationship when you stop falling and start choosing. This was theirs. The hotel room Marcus had chosen for their meeting was neutral territory, expensive enough to feel safe, public enough to seem legitimate. But Richard wasn't going in unprepared. Hidden cameras, recording devices, backup plans layered on backup plans. Tonight, Marcus Webb would confess to everything, or Richard would make sure he never threatened anyone again. But first, he had something more important to take care of. Danielle stood by the windows of his penthouse, watching the sun set over Atlanta, her silhouette outlined in gold and shadow. She'd been quiet since they'd discovered the truth about her mother, processing 15 years of lies and grief and rage. You don't have to do this, Richard said, approaching her slowly. I can handle Marcus myself. He killed my mother. Her voice was steady, but he could see the pain she was carrying in the set of her shoulders. I'm not walking away from this fight. I know. I wouldn't ask you to. He touched her shoulder, turning her to face him. But I need you to know something before we go to war together. What? I love you. The words came out simple, honest, devastating in their completeness. Not because you're helping me, not because we're facing this together, but because you're the strongest, most honest person I've ever known. Danielle's eyes filled with tears, but these weren't tears of grief. These were tears of recognition, of coming home to something she'd never dared to hope for. I love you too, she whispered. I think I started falling the night you saw through my desperation and chose to help instead of judge. The space between them disappeared as Richard cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the high line of her cheekbones. Whatever happens tonight, whatever Marcus tries to do to us, I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it turned your life upside down, especially because it turned my life upside down. His smile was soft, tender, completely at odds with the dangerous man he'd become when Marcus threatened her. You made me remember who I used to be before the money, before the success. You made me remember what it feels like to fight for something that matters. When their lips met, it was with the desperation of people who knew that everything could change in the next few hours. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as 15 years of loneliness and 3 weeks of building tension finally found release. Richard's hands tangled in her hair as she pressed closer, her body fitting against his like they'd been designed for this moment. The city lights sparkled below them, but neither of them noticed. The world had narrowed to this room, this moment, this choice to trust each other with everything. Are you sure? He asked against her lips, giving her one last chance to change her mind. Instead of answering with words, Danielle reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what they were choosing. This wasn't just about physical desire, though the heat between them was undeniable. This was about claiming each other, about choosing love in the face of danger, about refusing to let Marcus Webb's evil touch the most precious thing they'd found. Richard lifted her in his arms, carrying her to his bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. but his eyes never left her face as he set her down gently, treating her like something precious, irreplaceable. "I've never," she started to say, then stopped, suddenly self-conscious. "Never what?" "Never been with someone who mattered this much." Her honesty was breathtaking, vulnerable in a way that made his chest tight. "Never trusted anyone enough to be completely myself." "Then we'll go slow," he promised, his hands framing her face. "We have all night." "When did you know someone was worth fighting for?" "That moment when attraction becomes love. Tell me about that experience." They made love with the tenderness of people who understood how rare it was to find someone who saw your scars and loved you more, not less. Richard worshipped her body with a reverence that made her feel beautiful, powerful, completely safe despite the danger waiting for them in the morning. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of choice and consequence, Danielle traced patterns on Richard's chest with her fingertip. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know that tonight was perfect." "Tomorrow we end this," Richard replied, his arms tightening around her. "Marcus thinks he's won, but he has no idea what he's really up against." But as sleep finally claimed them, neither Richard nor Danielle noticed the red light blinking on the surveillance device hidden in the air vent. Marcus's insurance policy, recording everything for the final phase of his plan. As they lay together afterward, Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent message that made his blood run cold. "Enjoy tonight. Tomorrow, she disappears forever." The final game was about to begin. Love makes you brave, but revenge makes you ruthless. And tonight, they need both. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta looked like the perfect place for someone to disappear forever. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, the kind of industrial wasteland where screams wouldn't carry and bodies wouldn't be found for months. Marcus had chosen the location carefully, just like he'd chosen everything else. But what he didn't know was that Danielle and Richard had chosen their own plan, their own weapons, their own version of justice that would make him pay for 15 years of lies and murder. "You came alone," Marcus said, stepping out of the shadows as Richard entered the warehouse. "Smart man. I came to hear what you have to say." Richard's voice was calm, controlled, giving no hint of the rage burning beneath the surface. "And to end this before anyone else gets hurt." "Noble of you. But we both know it's too late for that." Marcus smiled, the expression cold and predatory. "Your little girlfriend has seen too much, knows too much. She's a liability that needs to be eliminated. Leave her out of this." "I can't do that, Richard. She's the one piece of evidence I can't control, can't buy, can't intimidate into silence." Marcus began pacing, enjoying his moment of perceived triumph. "Did you know her mother tried to blackmail me? 15 years ago, that self-righteous cleaning lady thought she could expose my operation and walk away rich." Richard's hands clenched into fists, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "So you killed her." "I eliminated a problem. Made it look like an accident. Left her daughter poor and desperate, never knowing that her mother died because she was too stupid to mind her own business." Marcus's laugh was like breaking glass. "I thought that would be the end of it. But then you had to go and hire the girl, had to fall in love with her, had to give her access to information that could destroy me. Where is she?" Richard's mask was slipping now, the fury he'd kept leashed beginning to show. "Safe. For now. But that depends entirely on your cooperation." What Marcus didn't see was the small recording device hidden in Richard's jacket, capturing every word of his confession. What he didn't know was that police were already surrounding the warehouse, guided by GPS signals from Richard's phone. What he couldn't have imagined was that Danielle wasn't cowering in some hidden location. She was moving through the warehouse like a ghost, using skills learned from a lifetime of surviving in dangerous places. "What do you want?" Richard asked, playing his part perfectly. "I want you to sign over controlling interest in Lawson Technologies to me. I want public acknowledgement that I was the real brains behind the company's success. And I want $50 million in an untraceable account as compensation for 20 years of being treated like a junior partner. And in exchange, your girlfriend dies quickly instead of slowly." In exchange, I don't release the videos I took of you two together last night, videos that would destroy your reputation and hers. Would you risk everything for justice? For the person you love? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk into danger for what's right. You're insane if you think I'll. Marcus's laugh cut him off. You'll do exactly what I tell you, because the alternative is watching her suffer before she dies. Because the alternative is living with the knowledge that your pride cost her everything. But Marcus's moment of triumph was short-lived. A sound from the shadows made him spin around, and his face went white as Danielle stepped into the light, very much alive, very much free, and carrying a gun she'd taken from one of his hired men. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I think we need to talk about my mother." The tables had turned completely. Marcus's carefully laid plan crumbled as police sirens wailed in the distance, and Richard's backup recording devices captured every word of his confession. "You think you're so smart," Marcus snarled, reaching for his own weapon. "But you have no idea what you've." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, but it wasn't Marcus who fired. Danielle's aim was perfect, her hand steady, her heart finally at peace as the man who destroyed her family's life collapsed to the ground. When the dust settled and the handcuffs clicked into place, Richard and Danielle stood victorious. But their greatest challenge was just beginning. Because now they had to decide, will you build when everything you fought for is finally yours? Victory tastes sweeter when you share it with someone who fought beside you, not for you. 6 months after Marcus Webb's arrest, Atlanta looked different through the windows of the newly renovated Lawson Technologies building. The glass towers still reached toward the sky, but now they reflected something cleaner, something honest, something built on truth instead of lies. Danielle stood in what used to be Marcus's corner office, now converted into a conference room for the Maria Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing legal aid and financial support to families affected by corporate crime. The irony wasn't lost on her that her mother's name now occupied the space where her killer had planned his schemes. "The quarterly reports look good," Richard said, entering the room with a stack of documents and a smile that still made her heart race after all these months. "The foundation helped 43 families last month alone. My mother would have liked that." Danielle accepted the papers, her fingers brushing his in a touch that still sent electricity through her system. She always said the best way to honor the dead was to protect the living. Their relationship had deepened in the months since Marcus's trial, built on a foundation of trust and shared purpose that made their love feel unshakable. Richard had made her a full partner in both his business and his life, recognizing that her street-smart instincts and moral compass were exactly what his company needed to stay honest. "There's something else," Richard said, and something in his tone made her look up from the reports. "What?" "We got a letter today from Birmingham, Alabama." He handed her an envelope with her name written in careful handwriting. "It's from your old friend, the one from high school." Danielle's heart clenched. Sarah, Savannah, the girl she'd been paid to humiliate at the prom. The friendship that had been damaged by jealousy and desperation and 15 crumpled dollars. The letter was short, handwritten on expensive stationery. "Danielle, I saw the news about what you've been through, about the foundation you started. I wanted you to know that I never blamed you for what happened at prom. I knew you were desperate, and I knew someone was using that against you. I'm getting married next month, and I'd love for you to be there. Not as a guest, but as my maid of honor. If you can forgive me for not reaching out sooner, for not being the friend you needed when your life was falling apart. Love, Sarah." Tears blurred Danielle's vision as she finished reading. "She want me to be her maid of honor. Are you going to do it? I don't know. After everything that happened, after the way I was ready to hurt her." She looked up at Richard, seeking guidance in his steady gray eyes. "How do you forgive yourself for the person you were when you were desperate? You remember that desperation doesn't define you," Richard said gently. "Your choices when you're not desperate, those define you. And every choice you've made since that night has been about helping others, protecting people, building something good. What would you build if you had unlimited resources and someone who believed in your vision? Tell me about your dream partnership, in business or in love." Before she could respond, Richard dropped to one knee beside her chair, a small velvet box appearing in his hand like magic. "Speaking of building something good," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have a question for you." Danielle's heart stopped completely. Around them, the foundation offices buzzed with the sounds of people working to make the world better. But all she could see was the man who'd saved her life in every way that mattered. "Danielle Carter, will you marry me? Not because I rescued you, not because you saved my company, but because I can't imagine building a future that doesn't have you at the center of it." The ring was beautiful. A simple solitaire that caught the Atlanta sunlight and threw rainbows across the walls. But it was the look in Richard's eyes that made her breath catch, the absolute certainty that this wasn't about gratitude or convenience or anything other than love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Danielle realized that this was what her mother had always wanted for her. Not wealth or status or security, but someone who saw her worth and chose to build something beautiful with it. "There's one more thing," Richard said, standing and pulling her into his arms. "I know you've been thinking about going back to school, getting your business degree. I want you to know that whatever you decide to study, wherever you want to go, I'll support you completely, even if it means long distance for a while. Even if it means I have to learn how to live without seeing you every day." His smile was soft, proud. "You're going to change the world, Danielle. I want to make sure you have every tool you need to do it." As they kissed in the office that bore her mother's name, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, Danielle knew that some stories don't end with rescue. They end with partnership, with two people choosing to build something bigger than either of them could create alone. 6 months later, as Danielle reviewed applications for their new foundation, one name stopped her cold. Her childhood friend from Birmingham was asking for help, and Danielle realized forgiveness might be harder than revenge ever was. The girl who once accepted $15 to betray a friend now had the power to change thousands of lives, starting with forgiveness. The wedding was everything Danielle had never let herself dream about. St. Philip's Cathedral in Atlanta sparkled with white roses and candlelight, filled with faces that represented the new life she'd built. Colleagues from the foundation, friends from Richard's world who'd accepted her completely, and most importantly, her mother's friends who traveled from Birmingham to see the girl they'd watched grow up finally get her fairy tale ending. But as she stood at the altar in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, watching Richard's face as she walked down the aisle, Danielle knew this wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales were about rescue. This was about choice, about two people who'd fought their way through darkness and decided to build something bright together. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Danielle barely heard the words. She was too busy memorizing this moment. Richard's hands steady in hers, the way the late afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Emma stood as her maid of honor, radiant in college girl confidence, home from Stanford for the ceremony. The girl who could have hated her instead had become like a younger sister, proud of the woman who'd protected her that night at prom. And in the front row, Sarah, not Savannah anymore, but Sarah again, watched with tears in her eyes, their friendship healed and stronger than ever. The vows they'd written themselves were simple, honest, perfect. "I promise to see your strength when you feel weak, to remind you who you are when the world tries to tell you who you should be, to build dreams with you that neither of us could achieve alone." When a minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Richard kissed her with enough tenderness to make the congregation sigh, Danielle felt her mother's presence like a warm embrace. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and dangerous, calm and electric, completely right. The reception was held at the community center they'd built in her mother's honor, the same Birmingham neighborhood where she'd grown up poor, now transformed into a place of hope and opportunity. Tables were filled with an unlikely mix of tech executives and community organizers, street-smart kids, and Ivy League graduates, all brought together by the simple recognition that everyone deserved a chance to build something better. "Mrs. Lawson," Richard whispered in her ear as they danced to their wedding song, "how does it feel to have everything you ever wanted?" She looked around the room, at Sarah laughing with Emma, at her mother's old friends sharing stories with Richard's colleagues, at the foundation staff already planning their next project to help struggling families, and realized he was right. She had everything she'd ever wanted and so much more she'd never dared to dream. It feels like responsibility, she said honestly, like gratitude, like the beginning of something important. Any regrets? Danielle thought about the girl she'd been 15 months ago, desperate enough to accept $15 to destroy someone else's happiness. That girl felt like a stranger now, but she was still part of Danielle's story, still the reason she understood what it felt like to need help. No regrets, she said firmly. Not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts. So what would you have done? Taken the $15 or found another way? Would you forgive someone who betrayed you if you understood their desperation? Tell me in the comments what this story taught you about second chances. Later that night, as they slow danced alone in their new home, a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood that bridged both their worlds, Richard pulled back to look at her with an expression she'd never seen before. What? She asked. I'm just thinking about the night we met. How you walked into that ballroom, carrying $15 and a plan that would have changed everything for the worse. His hands were warm on her waist, steady and sure. And how instead, you ended up changing everything for the better. We changed it, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed, and the word felt like a promise that would last forever. Outside their windows, Atlantis sparkled with possibilities, a city full of people struggling and dreaming and fighting for better lives. Tomorrow, they'd go back to the foundation, back to the work of helping families avoid the desperation that had once driven her to that ballroom. Tonight, they celebrated the truth that had taken them both so long to learn. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is someone who sees your worth before you believe in it yourself. Someone who chooses to build dreams with you instead of for you. Someone who proves that love isn't about rescue. It's about recognition, partnership, and the courage to trust another person with your whole heart. The girl who'd once been worth $15 of betrayal had become priceless, not because someone else valued her, but because she'd finally learned to value herself. And that, more than any fortune or fairy tale ending, was the real victory. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, forgiveness, and second chances. Remember, sometimes the people who seem to have everything are looking for the one thing money can't buy. Someone who sees their heart, not their bank account. What's your story of unexpected love? Share it below.